This video is sponsored by Squarespace. Squarespace is an all-in-one website platform for entrepreneurs to stand out and succeed online. Just over 2 months ago, I gave my queen Anthurium a massive chop, and today we're going to look at the propagations to see whether it was successful. Hi everybody and welcome back to our YouTube channel. Alrighty, so as I said in the intro, it's been about 2.5 months that I gave my queen Anthurium a massive chop, and 2.5 months ago I had to do that because she really outgrew her pot as well as the moss pole. Plus, as part of moving and me dropping her twice during the move, she was a little bit damaged overall. I just didn't necessarily like the look of it, so I thought let's just give her a reset and start fresh. And a few things have happened over the last 2.5 months, but before we go into analyzing the results and whether this chop was a success, let's quickly have a look back at Jan from the past to see what happened. Wow, Brad is really putting on a show, right? Like, you're doing everything you can to distract from the plants. That's a yes. It is getting way too large for its IKEA cabinet. I dropped it twice when I was moving, so you can see all of this damage, which I'm not necessarily super excited to look at. So I thought it would be time to chop this up. It has a lot of roots that have grown into the moss pole. Let me put this a bit closer, but well, I suppose we'll find out in a sec how many roots there really are. Oh my God, so root bound. So this mix in here is really just a mix of sand. You can hear it, right? Hear it. Like how sandy it sounds. So it's sand, cocoa peat, and perlite. Alrighty, I opened one side of the moss pole. Oh. Holy moly, look at this. This is what I like to use moss poles for. I mean, look at these roots. All right, 15 minutes later, it looks like this. I'm honestly shocked at how many roots there were within the moss pole. So, guys, when I'm saying the moss pole is a vertical extension of your pot, all of this was just in the moss pole, whereas this was in the pot. And look how healthy and chunky these roots are. Oh my God, I made it. Well, of course not without any casualties, but that's okay. So, mesh and the plastic bit are kept intact as well, so all good. So, this is the queen. With a sharp knife, I'm gonna choose where I will change this. So, I reckon, is this gonna be okay? Oh my God, there's so many roots, I can't really decide where to chop. I reckon I'll just chop here. Alright, this is going to be my new top cutting. Now, it is throwing out an inflow over here right now, but I do not want it to focus any or like lose any energy on throwing an inflow. I have nothing to pollinate it with at the moment anyway, so I'm just going to chop that off. This is number one. I'll just let the cut colors over for just a hot minute. In the meantime, I have this, which, you guessed it, I'm going to turn into a bunch of cuttings. One. Now, queens have really small internodal spacing, so I don't really want to cut them into single nodes. I just keep them in double nodes, so they have 2 roots as well. Another one, this one has 3 roots, and then the stomp. What am I going to do? Let's pot up the big one first, because that's going to be like my main plant that I'm going to put back in the IKEA cabinet as well. So, given the size of the large root system, and I did a video on this recently where I said choose the size of the pot according to the root system. Now, that's a good fit for me. Now, that's a 20 centimeter pot. The roots will have plenty of room in here, and I can pot a new pole in here as well. Alrighty, now let's talk about the mix that I made. I made a mix that I've been trialing a couple of times and had great success. And it's basically very tree fern fiber heavy. Now I mixed a bit of perlite, pumice, bark and sand in here as well. Why am I doing this inside? Alrighty, here we go. Number one, I'll park it on the side. Alright, let's move on to the other cuttings. Again, I'm choosing a pot according to the size of the root system. So even like this, for example, it doesn't have any leaves. According to the leaves, I should choose no pot. This one will go into a 14 centimeter pot. Beauty. Next, we've got two. I'm actually going to pot them up together. A top tip, if you're worried about stem rot, see how I just kind of made the stems hover and really just the roots go into the pot, so the stem itself is not inside the pot, so it can't rot. And last one. This one actually came with a leaf, happy days, but even if it doesn't have leaves, these plants can easily reshoot. And let's go. Oh my god, did I just make the perfect amount of substrate for this? I just did. Alrighty, and that's it. But before we keep going with the video, let's hear about today's sponsor, Squarespace. I've been using Squarespace to build my own website over the last couple of months, and I have to say the experience has been so easy. It was really something I procrastinated for a really long time because in my head the process of building a website and keeping it up to date was just way too overwhelming. But that's until I discovered Squarespace. Firstly, I chose one of Squarespace's professional templates to give myself a head start. I then went in to customize the font and the font colors I want for my website, as well as adding nice pictures in the background. You can then go ahead and use Fluid Engine. Fluid Engine is a technology that very easily allows you to add or remove elements. You can drag and drop them anywhere on screen and resize them super easily. You can also customize the layout for mobile phone or desktop usage. And then lastly, I added a newsletter element to my website so that people can subscribe to my mailing list. This then comes in super handy when it's time to send out new product alerts or any other updates to my website or business. You can click the link in the description or head straight to squarespace.com/SydneyPlantGuy and save 10% of your first purchase of a website or a domain using code SydneyPlantGuy. Again, thank you so much Squarespace for sponsoring this video, but let's get back into it. Alrighty, well that was definitely a big chop. I don't usually chop my plants into that many parts just because what am I going to do with all of them? But with the queen, I definitely have a few friends who would love a propagation, so I thought might as well. So let's maybe focus on the big plant first and then I'll talk about the little propagations as well. So this is the mother plant, and the mother plant was inside my IKEA cabinet the whole time. Pretty much straight after the chop, it grew this weird leaf over here, and I actually had to chop one half off because one half, and I suppose that's the half that developed later, was really struggling. It was kind of really like deformed in shape, so it kind of like stopped the other half from growing as well. So I just decided, well, I just knew, okay, this is never going to be a nice leaf, so let's just chop one half off. I don't know if that makes sense. Oops. Well, whatever. Anyway, that wasn't unexpected because that leaf would have already been in development at the time of me actually chopping the plant. So I basically just stopped it in its tracks, and instead of just developing beautifully and normal as usual, it suddenly had like a 1/10 of the root system left. Obviously the plant kind of stopped putting its energy into the leaf and started developing a root system again. So that is very common, and that's one of the reasons why I also really don't like top cuttings, because I feel like even if you have a top cutting, yeah, you have the active growth point, but the active growth point is most likely going to produce a really like manky leaf. I much prefer stem propagations. But yeah, each to their own. Now, let me come up close maybe. Ooh, what is this? Oh, that's a manky old stem. Let me get rid of that and then I'll come give you a close up. So, this plant has been very busy building a root system. Look at these juicy roots everywhere. It's really loving that water retentive mix. Here, everywhere. I hope it's okay. I hope the visibility is okay despite the glare. And also have a look at this new shoot over here. So it is definitely happy and it's growing a new growth point right here. And I can't wait to see how big that leaf is going to be. Also, I can see a few roots sticking out over here already. So definitely there's some sort of level of vertical root growth, which is good. So yeah, overall a really big success. As I mentioned again, the focus is not necessarily on the leaves that it already has. Leaves come and go, right? They will eventually deteriorate anyway. And obviously with a massive chop like the one I gave it, it's going to deteriorate a little quicker. So really the focus over here is re-establishing a healthy root system so that it can grow nice new leaves and large ideally as well. And obviously the bigger the root system, the more potential the plant will have to grow and support large leaves. So very happy with that. Cannot wait for it to grow 2-3 more leaves so I can chop the old ones off. But for now, you know, as long as these can still contribute to photosynthesis, why not keep them? But I can't wait for it to grow big leaves like this again. We'll see. That's also something that we should really normalize. Like with plants, they don't just, it's not linear. It's not like they're just gonna keep looking nicer and nicer and nicer. It kind of comes in waves, right? There's like a moment where some plants just look absolutely perfect and then they kind of just slowly deteriorate with the season or maybe because there was some pests or something like that. And that's okay, they can regrow again, right? So I have different favorite plants depending on whichever plant is currently thriving. But they're not all thriving at all times non-stop, right? And that's okay. That's what I appreciate about the hobby, right? Like we're working with living organisms. They are changing. It keeps it interesting. Otherwise it would be boring, right? Alrighty, and then I had 3 pots of propagation, some of them single planted, some of them double planted. This one over here, I put inside my bedroom with all the other anthuriums. And 2 of them I just put into this prop box and I had it right pretty much where you are right now, where the camera is right now, so right in my west facing window. This one got light from my mother grow light, these ones got natural light. But I think the big difference really is that within the prop box, and I keep the lid kind of closed most of the times. Sometimes like I lift it up a little bit just so there's a little bit of airflow. But really the main difference is that within this prop box there would be, you know, 90+% humidity, very similar to the IKEA cabinet that also has great humidity. The IKEA cabinet would have way more airflow though, so there is obviously not much airflow within this box, so that was actually my main concern, but there was no issues. Let me take them out so you can maybe see them. Here we go. And I'll give you a close-up as well. So quite clearly the 2 in the prop box are doing much better than the one that wasn't in the prop box, despite the fact that the one that wasn't in the prop box is the thickest part of the stem. So it's the most mature one, should grow the biggest leaf. This one is the second biggest stem. This one is the stump, right? So you can see that technically this should be the biggest leaf. Now it's still unfurling, it could become the biggest leaf, we'll find out, but it's definitely a little behind, like a little slower. Now that could also be because obviously the biggest piece of the stem is the newest piece of the stem, which would have had the least time to root, so potentially has the least root system. But that's the main benefit of this propagation method, me using the grow vertical pole. So the grow vertical, this one over here, you know that with the plastic backing, and they're always linked in the description. Using that pole to grow the plant in the first place is basically air layering every single node. So by the time I potted these up, they don't need to work on re-establishing a root system. They have a root system that is much larger than the plant itself at this stage. The plant is just a stump. So the plant doesn't need to focus on growing roots. The plant needs to focus on growing leaves so it can produce energy. So none of these are really showing big signs of root growth. Actually, like pretty much none. I can't really see any roots pushing towards the edge of the pot. But again, not unexpected. It already had roots. It doesn't need to work on a root system right now. It needs to work on leaves, and that's exactly what it's done. So I don't know, I've never propagated queen anthuriums before, so I don't know if like 2 months is a fast propagation or if it's slow. I mean, it was also winter, so they got not the best light, specifically those two that were relying on natural light. But ultimately, it's not necessarily just about speed. This is not a race. It's about the fact that it's basically going to give you 100% success unless you somehow end up getting root rot on your propagations, of course. But the most likely part to fail when it comes to propagations is getting the stump or getting the cutting to root. Once it has roots, there will definitely be leaves at some stage, right? But if you don't have roots or the stump fails to root in time before it kind of just shrivels up and runs out of energy, then it's a lost cause. So with that propagation technique, I have had nothing but success, if that makes sense. So if you're worried or if you have a plant that you know is having a hard time being propagated, like I heard Pothos Enjoy, Florida Beauties, I think they're really, really hard plants to propagate, or I've heard a lot of stories about people really struggling to get them to root after they take cuttings. Maybe get them to root before you take the cutting using that vertical growing technique. Anyway, let's look at these a little bit closer. All right, so cutting number 1, that was the initial stump. So quite thin. Yeah, you can see first leaf is looking cute and it's already working on its second leaf over here. So happy days, not much happening on the root front. I can see some of the existing roots that I potted it up with, but if you compare that to the growth of the mother plant was definitely showing way more root growth than leaf growth. Alright, then next to that we've got 2 stumps actually in here. One is here, that will be the second biggest one, and it's now pushing out its first leaf. And then this is the third thickest piece of the stem, and that has produced this beautiful leaf over here. Very, very happy with that. Despite it being double planted, I cannot see a lot of roots. Again, I just see the roots that I already potted it up with, but I can't see much new root growth. And then lastly, this is the biggest piece of the stem. So that's just the last piece, and then the mother plant would have come up top here. Working on its first leaf, still unfurling, so we'll see how big it's gonna get. But it actually has 2 shoots. I don't know if you can see that. There's one more shoot hiding over here. So double shoot on this one. Yeah, but again, and you can see the roots that I already potted it up with in the first place. So definitely a success in my books. Now when it comes to care, I think I watered them twice in those 2.5 months. If there aren't many leaves, the plant isn't going to use a whole lot of water. If they're in an environment that is very high humidity, there's not much water evaporating that the plant isn't absorbing. So overall, there isn't much watering requirement because the plant nor the environment is using a whole lot of the water in the first place. So specifically after I propagate and they're like leafless stumps, I'm very, very conservative with the watering. I also used a much more water retentive mix for these than my normal aeroid mix. Remember, it's very, very tree fern fiber heavy, so it was mainly tree fern fiber, bark and perlite. So the tree fern fiber has a much higher water retention capacity than my normal aeroid mix, so I don't need to water as much. Same goes for this one. It has a little bit more airflow in the IKEA cabinet, so it dries out a little bit quicker, and obviously it has much larger leaves to support, so I definitely have to water this more frequently, about every couple of weeks. But I sound like a broken record. Don't just take a number that I use and apply it to your journey. Always assess whether the plant actually requires watering and then water accordingly. Alrighty, so in a nutshell, what have we learned from this experiment? We've learned from this experiment that it is definitely worthwhile growing your plants on a grow vertical pole, even if they're really slow climbers. Anthuriums are not often plants you consider when we talk about growing them on moss poles, but they are slowly climbing, and despite just providing them with a support system, you're predominantly helping your future self with propagating these anthuriums. Secondly, I think it was a good idea to take double node cuttings, not single node cuttings. So some of them can have a double shoot, but most importantly, each piece has at least 2 root systems, if that makes sense. If you only have one node with, let's say, 1 root, then chances are, thanks Brad for your contribution, chances are that that 1 root might kind of get damaged during potting up and so on. So always taking slightly larger cuttings, specifically with plants that have really small internodal spacing, is just a little less. It's just reducing the risk of anything going wrong. Thirdly, when you do propagation, the most likely thing to happen is rot. So the way that I potted these up, because it already had roots, was that kind of the stem is hovering and only the roots are really potted up. So that way the stem isn't really touching the substrate in the first place. So it isn't getting in contact with moisture, apart from obviously moisture in the air, which just reduces the likeliness for rot. Nothing has rotted over here. These are all looking perfect. And then lastly, don't be afraid to cut your plants. I did the chop and it was quite substantial, and I got rewarded with now, well, 5 plants. One is still growing over here, but with 5 plants instead of just 1. So that was definitely worth it. So I hope with this experiment I can encourage you to go ahead and chop your plants, but maybe before you cut them, grow them on a moss pole so you can take advantage of all the propagation benefits moss poles have to offer. Thank you so much for watching. Leave a queen anthurium down in the comment section and I'll see you in my next video. Bye!